Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
We consider the impact of trade deals being announced at the White House. Of course, it was Japan late yesterday. We talked about it here on Balance of Power. Has its own elements that the president trumped last evening at the White House. That has been followed, of course, by news on the terminal here that the EU could be next. We're going to explore both of these ahead. Listen to the president from last night at the White House.
I just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan. We worked on it long and hard, and it's a great deal for everybody. It's a great deal. A lot different from the deals in the past, I can tell you that. We're doing things that have never been done in this country before, and our country is becoming very rich again, and that's the way it should be.
One of the main focal points when it does come to that Japan deal has to do with this $550 billion investment fund. It's something that the administration is touting as innovative and ultimately helped to get that trade deal over the finish line. And that's where we want to start by bringing in Bloomberg's Josh Wingrove. He helps to lead our White House coverage here. Josh, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
I'm wondering if you could help us connect the dots here, because we saw this deal emerge with Japan. The administration says that this investment fund ultimately was what helped to clinch the deal. Should we expect other trading partners, such as the European Union, to put something that the administration deems innovative on the table? One, would they? And two, what would that even look like?
I think innovative is going to be in the eye of the beholder. And I think the Japan situation was pretty unique. I think you could make the argument, for instance, that they had fewer ways to fire back than Europe did. They had less leverage that way. What they had was a pocketbook to make this pledge. Now, I should note we do not have details on it. And as we've been saying in our reporting, of course, the number was 400 printed on the president's desk until he scratched it out with Sharpie, and then it was 500. Now it's 550. We don't know details. The Japanese are saying these are loan guarantees. The Americans saying something different. Eye-popping number any way you cut it. One that'll be difficult for other countries to match. Perhaps South Korea, looking at a similar model. They have similar concerns to Japan around auto tariffs, steel tariffs as well. So, a big one here. I'm glad my toddler was asleep when this really popped off, because that really smoothed my night over a little bit. That was important. But I think one thing here is to back up, like, so much of Trump's view on trade was forged, like in how he, with Japan in the 80s in New York, and like all the consternation around that. So this is symbolic in some ways, but I think it's just really too early to say whether it's a template for the EU, and of course we're seeing today progress potentially on the EU or other deals like the South Koreans. We do think, though, that you start looking at this 15 number as more of a floor. One other thing that Trump did was scratch out 10. Right? The initial deal here was the Japanese would go down to 10 on general goods. No dice.
So this fund, this $550 billion, and to your point, yes, smacks of the 80s when the refrain was Japan is buying the ground beneath our feet. Is that the cost of selling cars here? That's the carve out for Japan? And where's all that money going? Can we do anything we want with it?
It is so unclear. I cannot stress this enough. It's like there's no details on it. No one's put anything in writing yet. We're going to see.
Including Tokyo.
They're correct. And the Americans are saying this is new money. For instance, SoftBank has already talked about a $100 billion pledge. The Americans are saying new money, so that would seem to preclude them sort of double counting previous announcements, which Trump has not been shy about doing in the past on things. For instance, of course, the Nippon Steel deal as well. So they're saying, look, we're going to have a new chips fab, going to be a $100 billion project. We heard from Secretary Lennox and Secretary Bessent this morning on this. The Japanese got to come up with the money, and then the operator leases that plant. But there's so many ways to slice this apple if you wanted to, and for instance, how they calculate what the net profit is, how the Americans get their share, who knows? But for the Japanese, this was the price of getting it down to 15. In essence, actually 12.5, because Akazawa is saying that the MFN rate is included in the 15. So previously, before all this started, the auto tariff was about 2.5, and now it'll be 15 for them. They can work with that. And now if you're the South Koreans, you have more pressure to try to match that. They, of course, have less domestic U.S. production than Japanese companies do. And if you're other automakers in Europe, in Canada, and Mexico, these numbers, probably change your calculus a little bit as well.
Well, since we are talking about how autos really were at the heart of this deal on both ends, the administration also says that it's going to see perhaps more lenient standards for U.S. automakers.
Yeah.
Sector-specific tariffs have really come into these negotiations under Section 232 enacted on national security concerns. These are totally separate from the so-called reciprocal tariff plans. Can you just walk us through, is this where the U.S. perhaps has more leverage? Is that why they're coming into the conversation in a meaningful way, or were they always supposed to be intertwined?
Yeah, I think it's a glass half full empty scenario right here. They had always separated these out, and the hint was that the U.S. did not want to budge on these sectoral tariffs, which, by the way, have a stronger legal footing than the IEEPA tariffs that we've been talking about there. So they're more bulletproof. And in some ways, they didn't. There's no change in steel tariffs, for instance, with the Japanese, who, of course, just bought one of the biggest American steel producers. So, it's... In some ways, you're looking, hey, look, maybe there is room for negotiation. The door's open to some of these 232 tariffs because the Japanese brought it down on autos. But they didn't on others, and it's still a little fuzzy on what they agreed to on pharmaceutical tariffs and semiconductor tariffs, which are coming. And they seem to be some sort of concession to the Japanese on that as well. But again, the price, if $550 billion of a presidential directed fund, which is what they're saying it is, Trump can pick a project, flick of a pen, and the Japanese have to fund it, is the price of bringing a 232 down 10 percentage points. That's going to be a pretty high price of entry if you're a country that is wanting to bring yours down as well.
Getting into the granular with Josh Wingrove, Bloomberg White House correspondent. Josh, thank you. Maybe next time we talk, it'll be about a deal with the EU.
Thank you, as long as it's before or after bedtime.
That's something we'll make sure is the case. As always, Josh Wingrove, and we want to add the voice of Congressman Brendan Boyle, who's, of course, ranking member on the House Budget Committee, also representing Pennsylvania's 2nd District. Congressman, it's good to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm really curious to get your ideas here on the budget writing process, because it looks like it could be fraught this September. But I'd like to ask you about the matter we're talking about at hand here, the trade deals that have been emerging from the White House. Some say this is vindication for the tariff regime. What do these deals with the likes of Japan, the Philippines, and others mean for your state, Pennsylvania?
Well, great to be back with you. Let's be clear, the reason why my state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, voted for Donald Trump by just over a percentage point is because overwhelmingly voters who swung from 2020 to 2024 were saying costs were just too high. I heard it anecdotally all over my district and really all over the Commonwealth. I even observed focus groups that was of swing voters, and it was so consistent. I would say for at least 80% of voters who swung, it was because of high costs. So what has Donald Trump done his first 6 months in office? He hasn't solved the problem of costs and goods being too high. He's actually made them worse. We see Amazon raising their prices on all sorts of goods, Walmart quietly raising their prices on all sorts of goods. The main driver of this, of course, the tariffs. This has been a real problem for our economy. The Fed has outright said the reason why they are keeping interest rates as high as they are because of the uncertainty of high tariffs. So forgive me if I don't applaud when the arsonist starts to put out the fire that he started in the first place.
But Congressman, at the same time, you also represent a state that's home to a lot of steel production in the United States, and we've seen many of the steel manufacturers applaud these tariffs in terms of a more protectionist policy. I'm wondering if you would caution the administration when it comes to any sort of potential carve-outs or limitations on these sector-specific tariffs like steel as they are negotiating these deals going forward.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up this example because whether you know it or not, you actually are bringing up an example of an area where I have supported tariffs. Now, what's the difference? I've supported tariffs in the past and currently as it applies to specific countries that are behaving in bad behavior and on particular products. So, for example, tariff on China for their constant, incessant steel dumping to hurt the U.S. steel industry. That is an example of using tariffs as a tool in the toolbox, but what President Trump is doing is entirely different. placing tariffs on over 90 different countries, many of whom are close U.S. allies, such as Canada and various European countries, Japan, South Korea, with all sorts of bizarre rates that have no justification. In fact, it's laughable when they attempted to pretend like there was an economic formula, mathematical formula, to describe these underlying these tariff rates, when in fact it was a completely fraudulent, made-up thing. So that is, I think, a clear difference between using tariffs in a narrow way as a specific tool versus what Donald Trump is doing, which are tariffs writ large as your major policy.
Well, Congressman, I want to know what is in your toolbox right now on the Budget Committee, because we've been talking with some pretty angry Democrats since the rescissions package passed days ago, and not that much longer ago, the president's big, beautiful bill. Are Democrats going to be party to debate, to regular order, if there is such a thing, in crafting a budget for the next fiscal year? Or have Republicans burned the bridge, and your response will be a middle finger?
Sorry, you threw me for a loop on the middle finger reference. Obviously, you know I'm from Philly, so you thought that I might be familiar with that gesture and a Philly sports fan. But anyway, I'll instead just talk about the budget process. Republicans, unfortunately, led by Russ Vought, the most dangerous man in America that almost no one has ever heard of, they are breaking the budget process. And the way they're doing it is by trying to have a normal appropriations process one day, and then the very day after saying, okay, but we're going to unilaterally rescind X, Y, and Z and break the agreement that we just reached. So, look, I don't believe in government shutdowns. They're costly. They don't make any sense. I don't want to see one. But let's be clear, I am not going to support a continuation of the status quo in which this administration is acting illegally as it relates to impoundment and rescissions. Let's not forget, the prevailing law here is the Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. The Supreme Court has previously ruled unanimously that what previous president did, President Nixon, when he went down this road more than a half century ago, the same road that Donald Trump and Russ Vought are going down today. So that's where things stand on the budget. If we are going to have regular order, then you certainly will see why Democratic support, but that's not what we're seeing from this White House.
But Congressman, let's say there's not regular order. Does that then make a shutdown perhaps inevitable here? Because you said that you don't want to see one, but we've spoken to a few different Democratic House members in the past week who seem to be flirting with the idea that Democrats could gain more leverage if they do threaten to shut down the government.
Well, I would direct you to actually a longer piece that I wrote for the Bulwark a couple days ago that kind of fleshes this out and adds entire clarity to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we need to get back to regular order, have a normal appropriations process without these unilateral rescissions. If the administration continues to do that, then I certainly would not be in favor or vote for a scenario in which we reach an agreement on a Monday on a bipartisan basis, and then the very next day on a Tuesday, the White House says, oh, thanks for your vote for that. We're now rescinding X, Y, and Z in that bill, but we're keeping the parts that we liked. I'm not going to be a sucker, and I'm certainly not going to go along with that. So I believe actually a shutdown is more likely than not, and it is directly as a result of what the White House is doing when it comes to the budget and rescissions.
The headline on your piece in the Bulwark is why Democrats must think hard about voting to fund the government. If that's the starting point here, Congressman, you wonder where we're going to be post-September. Will it be incumbent upon Democrats, if you are willing to vote to shut down the government, to also have a plan to reopen it at some point?
Yeah, let's be clear. Republicans, as they constantly remind us, are in the majority in the House and run the House. They're in the majority in the Senate and run the Senate. And they control the White House and all the executive branches. If there is a government shutdown, it will be because Republicans want to shut down the government, period.
Does another rescissions package, we've only got a minute left, make that more likely? If Republicans decide to rescind education funding, for instance, we can bank on a shutdown.
There is no question that another rescissions package from this White House is them essentially saying, we want a full government shutdown. Russell Vought, by the way, last week, let's not forget what he said. He said the problem with the budget process is that it's too bipartisan. So he's outright saying that they want a government shutdown and they want to force one.
He's the ranking member on the House Budget Committee and knows what he speaks when it comes to budget matters. Congressman Brendan Boyle, Democrat from Pennsylvania. We appreciate the insights as always. Let's stay in touch as we get closer to September 30th.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Indeed, we're gaining momentum here in earnings reporting season. We'll have a lot more to talk about after the bell. We're gaining momentum, Tyler, in the number of trade deals being announced by this White House. First fire to be lit under this market was Japan. Now headlines of a potential deal with the EU got us to new highs for the session. We've got the S&P 500 now up about 0.5%. The Dow's up 1%. Investors love where this is going, it seems.
Right, and we should point out a really critical part of this deal when it comes to Japan is that 15% tariff is going to extend to autos. This is something that we know Japan has been pushing for. Our data from Bloomberg Economics shows around 80% of that country's trade surplus with the U.S. is in car and auto parts, something that we've been watching really closely.
That's right. And as we promised you, a conversation with the source when it comes to tariffs at the White House. He's with us right now in studio in our Washington bureau. That would be Peter Navarro. I want to get the title right, Peter. Senior Counselor to the President, Director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy at the White House. Welcome back. You're the first person I thought of this morning. I saw the details on Japan and I thought, Tyler, what does Peter Navarro think about this? Because it was a 25% tariff at one point, right? And now we've got a very creative wrinkle with this investment fund.
Yes.
Was this in your vision for trade deals?
Yeah. Look, for your viewers and listeners, let's see where we started, right? We come in, President comes into the administration, we got a 2.5% tariff. That's basically what we're charging Japan. We went to 25% tariffs on autos through what's called the 232, right? And then we instituted a global tariff on Japan. And what we've got here is a beautiful thing. We go from 25% to 15% on autos for Japan. That was part of what President Trump was trading. The sneaky great thing about this is the $550 billion that we're going to get from Japan, and essentially as a blank check to invest in America. And the thing that really needs to be understood here is it's going to be used to basically cure our supply chain vulnerabilities. Okay? This is really important. We've seen in the pandemic that we were exposed on pharmaceuticals. We know we've got a chip problem where too many of the chips are made offshore. We've seen recently with China, their export restrictions on things like gallium, on rare earth magnets, critical minerals. And so this money, and Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, I think is going to be the symphony orchestra guy on this. We are going to figure out every vulnerability we have in our economy and make sure that we close that gap with now the help of the Japanese. So for me, that's the big thing. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is, because I know you're going to ask me about what's happening with the EU and things like that, what this deal does, as what the Indonesian deal did, is it spurs other deals along, right? In this case, right now, we're in a situation where, for example, German cars are going to be at a disadvantage now to Japanese cars because it's a 25% tariff on German. Same thing with Hyundais from South Korea. So as I'm just watching the boss, I mean, I'm almost getting tired of winning, but I don't think he ever will, okay? But as I watch him, he's like a maestro. He wasn't doing a Japanese deal. He was doing a synergistic whole deal with the rest of the world. This is just one part of that chess game.
Well, let's follow on this and talk about the European Union, because the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was asked on Bloomberg Television earlier today if the EU has put forth anything innovative, such as what we're seeing with this fund. Should we use this idea of the fund? Would that be something innovative that the administration is looking for? What are you looking for from the EU in order to clinch a deal?
Tyler, it's a great question. What I want everybody to know is that we have these large trade deficits with, we call them, the 15 big ones, right? And including the EU writ large. But every one, they're like fingerprints. Every country, or in this case, EU entity that we deal with, has a different set of problems that we got to deal with. So every deal is going to be unique to deal with that fingerprint problem. The problem we have with the EU is that they basically violate the WTO rules in terms of our ag products, so we can't export to them. They've got a tariff which was 4 times higher than ours when we got in, but they also have this thing, the value-added tax. I'd love to see some relief related to the value-added tax, which is unique. What I can guarantee you is once the deal's made, we're going to have a situation where we'll be able to sell more ag products, more autos, and we'll see a dramatic reduction in that trade deficit. But as to what it's going to look like, we'll see.
Is the design to see GMs and Fords driving around Japan, driving around Europe, or have we realized that that's not going to happen, and therefore the investment fund with Japan or something similar with the EU?
Well, certainly we'd love to see a lot more American cars driving around Europe. Japan's a tough market. If you've ever been there, they export a lot more cars than they ever use in the country. It's land constrained and things like that.
They drive on the left side too, Peter. They've got the steering wheel on the wrong side.
But I'm not going there. But what we can do with Japan is get them to buy more ag products. And the other part of the deal, which we didn't talk about, is Alaska LNG. I mean, if you think about Japan's vulnerability, they have a long-standing problem with China. There's over the Senkaku Islands and a whole bunch of other things, right? And they have to figure out a way to maintain their energy security in a world of volatility in Asia. And they're a lot closer to Alaska than they are to the Persian Gulf. Yeah, right. And so doing an LNG deal and using their money to help do it is a really big part of this. So look, they're an important ally to us, a long-term ally, and this thing works on both economic security and national security. And I got to applaud Jameson Greer, Howard Lutnick, and Scotty Bessent. What we've done is every country has a template, right? There's like 4 or 5 verticals that we look at in terms of tariffs, non-tariff barriers, digital taxes, things like that. And they're just going in, and the countries are lining up like they're at a deli pulling numbers, and they want a deal. And the president then comes in and closes it. And by the way, when he closed that deal last night, it started at $400 billion.
I saw the Sharpie.
Yeah. So
550.
Come on, you can do more. Yeah. So,
well, when we are talking about making the deals, I do have to ask you about our Bloomberg News reporting, which is that the EU sees progress towards a U.S. trade deal with a 15% baseline tariff. Is that where these numbers are going?
So let's view the spin of the game, right? The Canadians do this, probably the best or the worst, depending on what you think of that. But we don't negotiate in public, okay? These other countries aspirationally negotiate in public to try to get us to where they want us to go. So I would say that even though it was reported on Bloomberg, I would take it with a grain of salt. Let's see what happens. Never assume that anything's fixed until the boss says it's fixed.
But should we expect that the baseline rate is tending closer to 15?
I wouldn't go there. That's aspirational to the EU. It depends on what they give the boss. I mean, look, here's the problem with the EU. Besides the high tariffs that they charge us, high tariffs, their non-tariff barriers, when we've challenged them on meat and pork, In one cases, they refused to abide by the cases, so that's a problem. This, I'm telling you, the value-added tax, okay? It's like on autos. Yep. You start with a 10% tariff, and you add a 19% value-added tax. That's not just a tariff. It's also an export subsidy, the way it works under the rules of the World Trade Organization. And then you got all these digital taxes that the Europeans invented and trying to slap on our big tech companies. So let's see what happens. I never get ahead of the boss. I'm happy to talk about the EU deal. I'll come right back here to talk about it.
I look forward to that.
But I caution you that if the EU is putting something out there in the biosphere out here, it's aspirational rather than maybe what's going to happen.
We hear you. When it comes to August 1st, markets, of course, want to know what we can bank on here. Are you in a world where if you get enough of these, you add a couple of more countries, maybe it's the EU, South Korea, something else that I'm not thinking of here. Do you say, you know what, it's August 1st, everybody, you're on your own? Or would you extend that to countries that are in talks with the White House?
Again, I never get ahead of that. My job is to help the trade team figure out what we have to negotiate for. Again, give you an example. For example, on the whole critical minerals, rare earths thing, when we were hit with that by China, that was a major thing, I think, in world geopolitics, right? It's not nothing for China to withhold something as critical to technology as they did. It was a wake-up call to the world. But what that has focused our attention on is how do we solve that problem? So now we think in terms of what's Japan, what's the Congo, what's Guyana, what can they contribute? That's one of the verticals.
Sure.
Okay. So again, let's.
It's going to be case by case, is your point.
Case by case, yes.
Well, since you did bring up China, the administration moved last week to ease those restrictions when it did come to NVIDIA selling its H20 chips. I'm wondering if you have any national security concerns around this move, which had been put in place originally because of those.
That was not my lane. I mean, basically, we're giving them the H20, and we believe that that's in the interest of the United States. I think the reporting on that was a little bit over the top in terms of what China was actually getting, but that's not something I want to wax eloquent. Get Howard here or David.
We've been lucky to have Howard Lutnick, Scott Besson, and now Peter Navarro all on the same day in this studio, which is pretty remarkable, and we've learned a lot from these conversations. Is there any of this?
I'm like, they were like my opening acts.
I think we saved the best for
Sorry,
last.
Howard, Scotty.
I think we saved the best for last.
Or am I the epilogue?
I don't know. Let's ask the boss when we're done. When it comes to the defense contractors, we can talk about GM, but Tyler mentioned national security. When you hear Raytheon or Lockheed say, hey, this deal is eating into our margins when we're making missiles and military hardware, is that the cost of doing business?
So let's go back to the Japan deal. We just got 100 more orders for Boeing, and we got the Japanese to significantly increase
the impact on the margin.
We're going to do our arms sales to them. And during the first term, I was basically the tip of the spear on arms sales, and we were having some big problems with the Hill and all, and even within the State Department. And then we just turned that around and started selling F-16s to Bosnia and stuff like that, and that's good for America because it means we don't have to fight the battles. We create jobs at home. So Raytheon's going to be quite happy, and if any Raytheon lobbyist dares criticize any particular part of the Trump thing, they're not seeing the big picture.
Okay, because the scale, the increase in business will offset the impact on margin that we're talking about, is your point.
I think that's what the markets have figured out. I remember when the boss first put on the tariffs in the market, the Dow went below 40,000. So I'd be sitting on a set like this. I said, what are you doing? We're going to 50,000.
We're at a new all-time high here already. 50,000? That's the
that'll
target
be easy.
for Peter
We'll do
Navarro.
that in our sleep.
Come back and see us when you get the next deal. It's good to see you, as always. Straight from the White House, Peter Navarro. It's only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome to the Wednesday edition. We're live in Washington, as Charlie mentioned, here on Bloomberg Radio, satellite radio, channel 121. You can watch us on Bloomberg Originals and, yes, right now on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Business News Live because you're going to want to see, not just hear, our conversation with Senator Bill Cassidy. We have news today. It started last night. It's still developing. We'll start with Japan. A big deal announced by President Trump, who is still trumping the benefits of this deal with half the administration, it seems like, out in force today, most of them here on Bloomberg. Let's start with the president last evening in our new deal with Tokyo with a 15% tariff. Here's Donald Trump from last night.
I just signed the largest trade deal in history. I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan. We worked on it long and hard, and it's a great deal for everybody. It's a great deal. A lot different from the deals in the past, I can tell you that. We're doing things that have never been done in this country before, and our country is becoming very rich again, and that's the way it should be.
Well, it's being well received on Wall Street. Markets are on a tear here, and it's not the only reason. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, in studio here at Bloomberg, talking with Anne-Marie Hordern this morning, says Japan's pledge of hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. investments could be a model for the EU. Just like that, we have headlines on the EU, and this is why the markets have just reached to new highs for the day. The Financial Times reporting U.S.-EU close on a 15% tariff deal. U.S.-EU would have waive aircraft, spirits, medical device tariffs. Your wine, it appears, may be safe. The euro hitting the day's high on this report on U.S.-EU tariff talk. This is something that we discussed with both Howard Lutnick and Scott Bessent earlier, and it does appear that we may be on the verge of another big announcement. This would be, with regard to the EU, likely the biggest that we've seen yet, assuming that it does come in the form of a true deal. Now, as promised, the senator from Louisiana is with us. He's live on Capitol Hill. Republican Bill Cassidy, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio, Doctor. Good to see you. We've got a lot to talk about, from government funding to trade, as I mentioned, to your effort now, your plan to save Social Security. And I'd like to get into all of these. First, with news breaking on trade, I have to ask you about this. We'll start with Japan. I was amazed to learn about how much business Louisiana is doing with Japan. In fact, your state is the second in the nation for foreign direct investment from Japan. The president's deal here includes this investment fund I mentioned, $500 billion to make more investments in the U.S. How much of that money should go to Louisiana?
A lot of it will go to Louisiana. We have both access to inexpensive natural gas, a great workforce, the Mississippi River to transport goods around the world. And so Japan and other countries are investing in Louisiana for products not just for our country, but for around the world.
If there's an EU deal announced today, Senator, or in the days ahead, is this vindication for the whole idea of the Trump tariff regime?
Yeah, I think the president aggressively pushing back on other countries with their tariff and non-tariff barriers is clearly paying dividends. And so you got a tip of the hat to the president. He saw it through, and it appears to be working.
Well, let's get to your business in the upper chamber, Senator. I know in the House, they're heading home today. It's flyout day for members by order of the Speaker. Is Leader Thune planning to do the same, or are you going to stay overtime to work on nominations or other legislation?
He's talking about staying overtime to work on legislation. To work on nominations. Of course, I'm hoping we also do some legislative stuff. We're here to pass laws to make the country better. So we have that opportunity, let's do so. Principally, he's looking at nominations.
Nominations, and maybe, God forbid, spending a little time on writing a budget for the next fiscal year?
Wouldn't that be good? The three appropriation bills that we're taking up have significant rescissions, a rebalancing of where we spend our money. I like that because it may not be that we need another rescissions bill, because on a bipartisan basis, Congress has come together and said, let's shave here and push up there. And they're significantly increasing defense spending in a more dangerous world, but significantly decreasing other pots of money, showing the Appropriations Committee is doing the people's business of making sure we spend our money wisely.
Well, Senator, our viewers and listeners should know, if they don't already, that you're not only a practicing physician, you're chairman of the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. And you've got an important project underway that we've actually talked about before that is advancing to the next stage here, because you've got a Democrat on board, Senator Tim Kaine, helping to propose a rescue plan for Social Security. It would essentially create a second Social Security fund that would invest in more appreciable assets like treasuries. Senator, tell our audience how it would work.
Context: the Social Security Trust Fund is going insolvent in about 8 years. By law, the amount of money coming in has to match the amount of going out. When that trust fund goes insolvent, in order to match those two, outgo will cut by 21 to 25%. If you're getting social, or if you're going to, your benefit will cut by 21 to 25%. And nobody has a plan to address that. So our plan: create an investment fund separate from Social Security, put $1.5 trillion in it over 5 years, invest it like you would a 401k in the power of the U.S. economy, and over 75 years, but the rule of 72, which your listeners know about, the rule of 72, it just blossoms out. We use that money to offset any borrowing required to pay scheduled promised benefits. By the way, importantly, if the market goes up or down, doesn't affect the beneficiary. All risk is borne by the investment fund. And by that, we can bail out Social Security and also perhaps decrease our nation's indebtedness by 20%.
Never thought I'd be talking about the rule of 72 with Senator Cassidy. Where does the initial $1.5 trillion come from?
Yeah, so in our plan, we would borrow $300 billion a year for 5 years, but the way the federal government does its budget, we have a unified budget. So if you borrow money and put it in escrow, it does not contribute to your nation's indebtedness, because you could just dissolve the escrow and pay off the bonds. And so we don't add to the debt as we borrow that money.
And now these are treasuries that we're talking about purely? Would you invest in crypto
right
or any
now,
other securities?
Right now, the Social Security Trust Fund puts all of its money in treasuries. Some of those from like a few years ago are bearing 2%, less than the rate of inflation. No, we would do like your 401k. First, there'd be a board of trustees or investors an arm's length away from Congress and the executive. They would bid out to someone to manage the money, as the federal government currently does with the savings plan for federal employees, the retirement system. They would make the decisions on a fiduciary basis. They would make the decisions, again, arm's length separated, but they could put it in equities of any sort, in assets of any sort. They could put it in treasuries. Those are pretty low yielding, probably put it in something different.
If we're following rule of 72 here, and you're talking about decades, not years, Senator, in our remaining moment, you point out, you just said it as well in your op-ed in the Washington Post, the Social Security Trust Fund will be insolvent as soon as 2033. Would this separate account have enough money to make up the difference by then?
So not by 2033, so it only partially offset the borrowing required to pay scheduled benefits. By the way, everybody knows we're going to borrow that money. No one has a plan how to offset it. But in our plan, as it goes up, it at first would partially offset, and at the end, it could potentially fully offset and even evergreen the Social Security Trust Fund, so we never have to worry about this again.
He's got a Democrat on his side now, as I mentioned, Senator Tim Kaine joining hands with Senator Bill Cassidy on the effort to save Social Security. Senator, it's good to see you, and I appreciate your being with us. Welcome back to Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Thanks for being with us on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio. Find us on YouTube by searching Bloomberg Business News Live. You can always watch us on Bloomberg Originals as well, and listen to the program, or watch it for that matter, on the Bloomberg Professional app. Fun watching these markets alongside Charlie Pellet today. Everybody's in a great mood about the trade deals. We had Japan yesterday, at least a framework trade agreement. That's what we call it. Looks like the EU might be next. We're going to have more on this coming up at the top of our next hour in conversation with Bloomberg White House correspondent Josh Wingrove. We'll be joined as well by Congressman Brendan Boyle, who's the ranking Democrat, ranking member on the House Budget Committee. This is flyout day. They're already getting out of Dodge after this whole Jeffrey Epstein blow-up in the House. And an important conversation this time, next hour, 1 hour from right now, we sit down with the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro. Be very curious to hear how he's looking at these deals, of course, being the man who supported sky-high tariffs that seem to be shrinking before our eyes in some cases. But we'll get into this deal and see where we're going with the EU. Domestically speaking, as lawmakers fly home, there's big news. Mr. Salt is staying in Washington. Did you hear this? Mike Lawler, the congressman, Republican from New York, who's been on this program many times, talking about the state and local tax deduction, has decided to not run for governor of New York. It's a big breaker up in New York, and it's going to have some interesting implications about not only who's going to Albany, but who's going to be in his seat here in Congress. It might not be the easiest re-election effort, which is, well, why he's not running for governor. It's where we start with our political panel. They're both with us today. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie is Senior Democracy Fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Jeannie, you're in New York, and I'm going to start with you on this because, boy, we had it out over the SALT matter, and Mike Lawler has certainly had plenty to talk about here on Bloomberg. We've even asked him about his potential run for governor. He always danced around it. Does this mean, essentially, that we're going to have a race down to 2 here? Because it is very good news for Elise Stefanik, the Republican who now looks like will be facing the incumbent.
Yeah, that's right. I love your moniker, Mr. Salt, and I'm assuming the representative would love it as well. There's nothing he wants to do more than remind the people of the Hudson Valley and Rockland County, the 17th district, that he helped, lift the cap on salt. He worked so hard on that. But yeah, this race is really going to come down to 2. One of the interesting things is Governor Hochul is being challenged by her own sitting lieutenant governor, which is very odd. Right. But once he gets through that hurdle, it'll probably be Hochul versus Stefanik. And I think what this shows us is how focused President Trump is on 2026, on this particular district, because this is one of 3 that Kamala Harris won that was won by a Republican in the House. And this is one that Democrats are eyeing for a big pickup. And I think Donald Trump having Lawler in the White House, we understand last week and then just the other day, has made his position very clear that we need you, Mike. And so the representative is staying where he is, and he's going to try to run. And this will be a hard-fought race. I think one of the most watched in the 2026 cycle to see if Democrats can possibly take it back.
Rick, Governor Hochul says, of course, he doesn't have the spine to face me. Was this a decision based purely on polls in the governor's race, or more like Jeannie's talking about, he's more needed here in Washington when it comes to the Republican Party?
I think a little bit of Republican unity also. Elise Stefanik has made it clear she's going to be a candidate for that spot in New York. And really, based on the experience she's had in the Trump administration, first being identified as the next and future ambassador to the UN, then not being able to do that because they needed her votes. She really is the person who should be given the first shot at that. And I think Lawler is doing a real favor to her by setting aside his ambitions to let her run, especially in a very, very interesting Republican year. So that being said, he does have his challenges, as Jeannie said. I mean, he's one of 5 districts in New York that Biden won that are currently occupied by Republicans, and they'll be the very top of the target list for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. So he's going to have to run a flawless campaign to make it back into Congress. And that will be his reward for becoming Mr. Salt.
Affectionately known. It's interesting you mentioned the DCCC. A spokeswoman for the D-Trip says, quote, Mike Lawler might have chickened out of a statewide race, but he can't outrun his heinous record of rubber stamping Trump's extreme agenda at every turn. What will this campaign be like for Democrats in New York, Jeannie?
It's going to be ugly. I heard Mike Lawler the other day talking about how Nancy Pelosi, of all people, has been approaching him on the floor, sort of tapping her wrist, saying, time, let's go. She wanted him to announce this run for governor. Now that he is staying put, they know it's going to be even tougher. The Democrats do, but they've got some wind at their back. You know, historically, this should be a harder year, 2026, for the Republicans. And Mike Lawler knows this better than anybody. Some of these town halls he's been giving over the spring, he has been viciously attacked by Democrats and Republicans over his support of things like the cuts in Medicaid and SNAP. And Democrats are going to keep pushing this. That said, I wonder how smart a strategy this is on the part of the president. You know, Mike Lawler has proven he can win in a purple district. We haven't seen that from Elise Stefanik. And while she'll have the endorsement of the president, she is going to have to defend her record as a leader of the Congress, which pushed through this bill with these tremendous cuts and the impact on the deficit. All the while, she has been just a real visceral supporter of the president, and he is most unhappy in the state, not to mention not unhappy, so unpopular. And of course, not to mention, it's been decades since a Republican has won statewide here. So, you know, I wonder if this is a good move on the part of the Republicans to back her versus Lawler in this race.
You wonder if this helps Lawler in his quest for now re-election. Rick Davis, he's introducing the Mamdani Act, referring, of course, to the Democratic nominee for mayor in New York, to examine the risks of government-run grocery stores. Rick, this legislation would direct the FTC to conduct a comprehensive study into the competitive, economic, and supply chain impacts of government-owned grocery stores, which is something that Zoran Mamdani has talked about, along with the free subway and so forth. Is that the kind of rhetoric that keeps a Republican in New York?
Well, I'm sure there's been a lot of polling around New York Republicans on issues raised by Mamdani in his primary campaign. And I'm sure this one spikes with people. What in the world do we want a grocery store run by the government? No telling what decisions they'll make on things like grapes and carrots. And so it's the power of incumbency. He can do that as a sitting United States congressman. To use the facilities of power that he's got available. And it's going to be a tough re-election for all Republicans. It's party out of power season. And so cycles matter. And this is not a good one for Republicans running for House seats. And so he's going to need every advantage he can make use of, and this is a very good start. The fact that he's focused on doing these kinds of things means he knows he's going to have a tough race, and he's going to use every ounce of power that he's got to be reelected.
I think Rick is suggesting that the grapes would be soft at the government-run grocery store. The fruit would be bruised, Jeannie. But you've got the matter of money as well at Republicans' backs here, and I'm wondering if you guys have thoughts on this. The RNC ended the first half of the year, $65.5 million cash on hand advantage over the Democratic Party. How worried does that make you, Jeannie?
It is a source of worry. I think, you know, Republicans have done a very good job raising money for these House races, and Democrats not so much. You know, it really is going to fall on Hakeem Jeffries and his team to get out there and raise the money they need. And one of the things that's hurting the Democrats is things like Mamdani winning this primary. I mean, he is the gift that keeps on giving to Donald Trump and the Republicans. And that is something they are going to take to the bank, and they already have. So they really have to get Democrats a message together that they can run on, so that they can keep up this history of overturning the House and taking it back. It's going to be very close, but they're going to need money, and they're going to need a message and leadership to do that. And Republicans so far, Mike Johnson, is showing that they can raise with the best of them. And these are historic fundraising numbers for him.
You wonder if the government-run grocery store sells the Coke with the sugar cane or with the corn syrup. There's got to be a government mandate on one of those. Rick, are we making too much about the role money plays in this campaign, or are we going to start talking about a counterintuitive take here that Republicans keep the House?
Well, as Senator Phil Gramm once said, money is the mother's milk of politics. And I don't disagree with him. Money matters. You can't make too much of it, but it doesn't on its own elect anybody. And there are lots of examples of that. You know, Democrats are running around today with these fundraising numbers trying to say, well, you know, back in 2017, similar cycle, similar president, you know, we were radically out fundraised, same like now. And we did really well anyway. You know, that's a really lame excuse. Democrats are in a free fall. Democrat Party can't raise money. They don't have anybody out there, you know, taking leadership of the party who can. It's a difficult situation for them. And if they don't get on it, some of these very close races, like Mike Lawler's, may result in a Republican reelection when otherwise a better funded challenger could win that race.
There was recent polling from Tony Fabrizio that we talked about briefly, Jeannie, that showed the difference maker in Republicans holding the majority on Capitol Hill would in fact be the extension of expanded health care subsidies under Obamacare that are set to expire at the end of the year here if Congress does not act. Do you believe that singular issue could turn the tide? Is this still the narrative that history is on the side of the Democrats?
You know, I think it is a critically important issue, is this issue of healthcare, and the expansion of that is critically important. But the problem is Democrats can't pick up seats without having a message and a messenger. And that's the trouble they have had. And so when you have the president constantly talking about Mamdani, the socialist communist in New York City, as taking over the party, that is really going to weigh heavy on these Democratic races. And so they have to find a way to get back to a message of defeating the president and repealing this bill and the impact he has had on the middle, lower, and working classes of this country, despite promising otherwise. And just look at all these trade issues. They are hitting the lower and middle class who will pay these tariffs, not these foreign countries. So they need a message and a messenger if they're going to defeat.
Worth noting, Hakeem Jeffries still has not endorsed Zohran Mamdani, even after their meeting here in Washington. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.